The official title for tonight's talk was Urban Design in China and Britain, Lessons to Learn, but I think I preferred the kind of slightly more casual title of Urban Design Group Goes Global, 5 urban designers in Guangzhou. And 4 of us that made the trip are here this evening to talk to you a bit more about what we did. Monica, unfortunately, is now based in Australia, so is here in spirit but not in person. And then the extra 2 people on the left in this photograph were a couple of locals who we met when we were on our wandering around the town, who were very keen to talk to us as English speakers. They were quite keen to have a chat to us in English, which was very nice. So a little bit about the background to the visit. It all started here actually at King's Cross, German gymnasium, for those that don't know it. And basically Monica bumped into her old friend Mr. Zhu from the Guangzhou Urban Planning and Design Studio, who was in London on a fact-finding mission or a study tour, and they went for a drink and had a catch-up at the German gymnasium, and over the course of their discussions he asked whether or not the Urban Design Group would be interested in taking part in a knowledge exchange session in the forthcoming months, and that kind of started the ball rolling, if you like. And ended up with a group of 5 of us going over to Guangzhou and meeting with the Urban Planning and Design team on a series of workshops and also a conference. As part of it, we made a commitment when it was decided that we would do it and that the group would kind of engage in the visit to have I suppose as much feedback to the wider group and the membership as possible, and that really has manifested itself in 3 parts. So the first part to that was an article in the Urban Design Journal. Hopefully everyone's got their copy of the latest edition of Urban Design and Climate Change. If you look in there, you'll find a 2-page article which gives a very high-level overview of the trip. It was written pretty much as soon as we got back to get out as quickly as possible. And then the second part of this is tonight's event, and you'll see the agenda there. Hopefully you've seen it on the website already. I'll give you a brief introduction, and then Barry will talk a little bit about urban design in China more generally. Colin will then give his thoughts on Guangzhou and what we found there as a first-time visitor. Mike will give a bit of an overview on the workshops that we had. We had 3 kind of one-day workshop sessions, and he'll go through those in a bit more detail. And then at the very end, I'll just sum up some of the kind of lessons learned and what our hopes are for taking this forward in the future. And as I said, if we can get through it quickly enough, we'll have time for a Q&A session at the very end as well. And then the third part of the feedback will be a Urban Design Journal supplement, which, fingers crossed, as long as we can finish getting the articles edited and ready in time, should be coming out with the next edition of the journal. So that will be a standalone document with some sort of more detailed articles on some of the things that we've touched on tonight, a bit more detail on the visits, the workshops, and also some additional articles on different areas of interest, and also an article from our host as well, written about kind of urban design in Guangzhou in a bit more detail on what their approach is. So in terms of the visit itself, it was a 5-day trip from 10th to 15th September last year. First day was very much an orientation for us, finding out a bit more about the Guangzhou Urban Planning and Design Service and Guangzhou itself, and then we had a very nice welcome meal in the evening. We then had the 3 days of workshops, which, as I mentioned, Mike will talk a bit more about later on. And then on the final day we had something called the Cantal conference. This is Can, because Canton was the old name for Guangzhou. So they have this series of conferences called Can Talk, where they invite different people to come and speak, both domestic speakers from within China and international visitors. And this was a kind of open to all event, really, where we talked about some of the topics and the themes which they felt were quite pertinent to what they're currently doing. And again, we'll talk a bit more about that in a while. Just very quickly to help you orientate yourselves, and Mike will talk in a bit more detail about where we were, but this area is known as the Pearl River Delta. Some people describe it as the world's largest city, the world's most mega city. It's about 60,000 square kilometres, 80 million people, and basically it sits, as you'd expect, around the Pearl River Delta. So the sort of top there, you've got Guangzhou sitting at the head of the river. and then at the bottom, the two sort of corners formed by the special administrative areas of Macau and Hong Kong. And it was Hong Kong where we started. So the four of us met in Hong Kong. Monica had gone ahead to make final preparations and was meeting us in Guangzhou itself. So we caught up in Hong Kong, had a quick look around the island. Very nice starting point. And then on the first day, we got the train to Guangzhou. Unfortunately, we didn't get that train. That's the new high-speed train, which the service started about a week after we left, so we just missed out on that. So we were on that train. A bit less glamorous, but I have to say, still quite comfortable, still relatively quick, only about 2 or 3 hours, I think, to whisk us from Hong Kong up to Guangzhou itself. And then we started our kind of work, if you like, with the initial session at their studio on the banks of the river itself. Fantastic views out across the water. They laid on an official photographer who took this fantastic kind of Reservoir Dogs-esque photograph of us all arriving into their offices. The greetings with Mr. Zhu, the director, there as we arrived, and then he gave us a very brief overview on both the city itself and also what they do as a kind of institution and body, and a little bit of information about what we're going to be doing over the coming days as well. And then afterwards we headed out. So this is an area known as the Party Pier. It's a former brewery which has now been kind of converted. It's a bit of a grassroots regeneration project. They're quite proud of it because it was something that's been put together by different businesses, and they kind of popped up and it's grown and it's formalised a little bit now. And these are the old grain hoppers which are converted into shops, actually, quite interesting. And there's kind of bars and restaurants, and it's a really busy spot. You get a great view of the skyline and it's kind of take in the nightlife of Guangzhou. Second day, the work proper started. We started with quite a long road trip up to one of the spa towns to the north of the city, and kind of it was an area where they'd done quite a lot of regeneration work, but it was very much skin deep regeneration, quite literally in some cases. They'd kind of rebuilt facades of buildings, and then behind it was exactly as it had been before. So this was the format where we had the morning, we'd do a site visit, we'd have a look round, and then in the afternoon we'd go back for a workshop. This is the only bit of the spa we could see. We were there out of season, so we couldn't actually get to see the main waters. I guess it's a cross between Bath and an English seaside town. It had that kind of seaside town out of season feel about it, a bit empty and vacant. And then when we got back to their offices, we then had a workshop which kind of started with a presentation. So they'd talk about specific projects and maybe some of the problems they were having, and then we would kind of go from there, and we'd give them our ideas and talk about it. As Mike in full swing, talking about some of the ideas for how we might sort of approach the scheme and what our thoughts were on it. And then in the evening on this first evening, we did a walk around some of the historic districts. So it was great. I think Barry's going to talk a bit more about some of the buildings in Guangzhou, but the history was that during the Opium Wars, a lot of the native Chinese left, went all over the world, and then afterwards came back, and they kind of brought back with them, I suppose, the architectural styles of where they'd been. So there's some really good kind of colonial-esque, I suppose, buildings, which actually were built by Chinese when they came back, made their money overseas, including things like canals, this kind of Amsterdam-esque area in this particular part of the city. And then we wandered off a bit more and had a look at some of the markets and the kind of real street life. Second day, same format again. So we started off this day at the high-speed station, Guangzhou South Station, Farrell's building. When it opened, it was the biggest station in the world. It's now about the third biggest in China, but still one of the biggest in the world. And they'd kind of got a couple of issues here. One was the station itself and how it's working or not working, and the kind of organisation of it and how people move around and the transport integrates. And then the second part was it's sitting very much as the heart of a whole new district, really, which is under construction. You can see here us kind of looking out across the building site. And it became clear over the course of the day that there were a number of question marks around how that gets developed out, and Mike will talk a bit more about that in his presentation later. And then again, back to their offices in the afternoon for a kind of workshop to go through some of the issues. And then after that, we went for a walk around the town again, this time kind of the main axis, I suppose, to the town, to have a look at some of the key buildings in Guangzhou. This is their equivalent of Oxford Street. This is their pedestrianised main shopping area, public parks. And then on the fourth day, our third and final sort of site visit day, we started out in one of the old towns. So this is a kind of historic preservation town that's been kept, fascinating place to walk around, one of the Julongs. And then from there we walked a kind of corridor along a little canal inlet through an industrial area which is undergoing a kind of regeneration that we might expect to see in this country, the kind of former industrial areas being regenerated. And these are some of the buildings which were kind of industrial buildings that have now been repurposed into artist studios and the like. And then again, in the afternoon, we had the workshop session talking through some of those issues, giving some thoughts on how the area could be developed while preserving some of that history as well. And then on the fifth day, we had the conference. So we moved out to the Urban Planning and Exhibition Centre, which I'll talk a bit about in a second. And we kind of had a number of sessions. Colin started by talking a bit about the Urban Design Group and who we are as an organisation and what we do. And then each of us in turn gave a presentation. Mike spoke a bit about some of his urban design influences. This was one of the local speakers. She's a director at the Urban Planning Design Service. She was talking a bit about urban design in Guangzhou and how they're kind of integrating it into the planning system. And then at the end of that, we had a Q&A session with audience were able to ask us questions as a follow-up. And here we all are with the various people on the conference. And as I said, it was held at their Urban Planning and Exhibition Centre. Those that do know China will know a lot of the large cities have these kind of urban planning exhibition buildings. They're absolutely fantastic. This is only opened probably about a year ago now, just at the start of last year. And it was incredible. I mean, I think from my perspective, sort of knowing the NLA in London, this was kind of NLA on super steroids. It was probably a cross between the NLA and the Museum of London, but even then it was quite something. So kind of just from the sheer size of the lobby when you go in, and this was an incredible kind of, well, they call it LED concrete, but I think it's actually concrete with like LED fibre optics embedded in it. So this kind of map of the historic development of the city appears and disappears over time across the wall as you go into the lobby. Various models, various sizes and scales. I guess this is probably akin to what you get at the NLA, but this is one of the smaller models. This is one of the larger models, which, as you can see, that kind of space is over about 2 stories, and a really large screen and video telling the development of the place over time. And then this was the 4D theatre, so you kind of sit down in these chairs that move around and you get noise, and it's a fully immersive experience, including steam and wind and goodness knows what else. So it really is quite something, and it kind of takes urban planning to a new level, I think. And then we finished with a nice meal on our last night before we packed up our bags and headed back to Hong Kong and then flew home. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the trip itself. As I said, each of the speakers will go into different aspects in a little bit more detail as we go through. So I will now hand over to Barry, who will talk a bit more about urban design in China.